This bit touches back on where we started this morning, really. So this is a panel discussion on inclusive productivity. And really it's starting to think about how can we maximize the almost exploitation of potential that exists in the population and all the skills and people that we have in the country, and invite them to make a difference. So I've got an amazing panel of experts, specialists who come from different places. So Susan, who's standing and will be at the podium, Susan Popoola, she's going to introduce herself differently, but she's a human value optimization specialist from a company called Mosaic Fusions, and she specializes in bringing people together. Sally Twisleton is the founder and director of Assemble Coaching, and does some work also with the Institution of Mechanical Engineers. David Sobo is Director of Operations for a charity called EDT, Engineering Development Trust, and they do work on a program called Industrial Cadets, which seeks to get young people into STEM-based subjects and careers. And Louise McIntosh is a manufacturing executive for Infosys Consulting, and one of two panelists who is a former Rolls-Royce employee. And I will not. Well, is it a good thing? I don't know. Because we want diversity and inclusion. So with that said, I will hand over to Susan and our esteemed panel, and then we'll see where the conversation takes us.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back. As Keith said, I do refer to myself as a human value optimization specialist because all that I do is really about people's value. And it's the value for the sake of themselves, and it's value for the sake of organizations, education, and wider society. And that's whether I'm doing work, whether I'm writing books which give insight, whether I'm working with leaders, helping them to navigate complexity, or whether I'm doing work around young people, most especially young people who have been in care. But today, I'm actually going to refer to myself as an elephant analyst. And the reason why is, if you think back to what Peter spoke about earlier, and he said the key is to be able to identify, to recognize the elephants in the room. But it's not just about spotting them. It's about being able to understand the elephants. What is the significance of the elephant? What does it mean to us? How do we navigate as a result of that elephant in the room? And so today, I'm here with three very expert people who, in their own right, do a very expert job in analyzing elephants as amongst other things. I did say I'm going to be a bit mischievous, and I was given permission to do so. One thing I always say is we've just got 45 minutes. We've got three experts here and myself who have so much that they could say, but we have so little time to do so. And so if you remember earlier on, Keith did say, make sure you connect with people. And I say, these are the people that you must connect with because you're going to get some sound bites from us, but there's so much more that goes beyond the surface of what we're going to share today. Keith has already done introductions. I don't know whether there's anything else that you would like to add to introduce yourself. Sally, is there anything you'd like to add?
I'll just do a really quick whiz through myself. So, I've spent 18 years at Rolls-Royce, so lots of familiar faces in the audience. Nice to see everyone again. A whole range of different roles, from operations to quality, engineering, and more latterly business development. I also am a fellow of the Institute of Mechanical Engineers and sit on the strategy committee, so hopefully bringing a little bit of that insight to the panel today. And currently I'm running my own business looking at coaching and facilitating in engineering with a view to kind of building collaboration, inclusion, and sustainable growth and bringing that to the industry.
Thank you. So, hi everybody. I'm David Sobo. I work for an organisation, as Keith said, called the Engineering Development Trust. We are an organisation that looks to support young people in providing them with pathways, or to understand the pathways to get into STEM organisations and into the STEM industry. We do that in two ways largely. One is we have our own framework called the Industrial Cadets framework, which is, we're really fortunate to be able to say, is patroned by His Majesty the King. And that framework allows us to accredit organisations' outreach programs based on a method that we've come up with. And the second piece is we run our own delivery as well. So we deliver to young people ranging from small, almost knee-high to a grasshopper, 11-year-olds, all the way through to 16 plus, providing apprenticeships and things like that. So I'll pause at that point.
Hello, everyone. So I'm Louise McIntosh. I have very recently joined Infosys Consulting. I've spent my career to date in the manufacturing sector and predominantly at Rolls-Royce in the aerospace sector. So again, recognise a lot of faces. It's been good to connect with lots of people. I've got a history of moving through various different areas, from program management to purchasing. I didn't start in STEM, but that is where I ended up my career when I was working in Rolls-Royce. And so I've seen things from the other side. And DE&I is something that I've been very passionate about, in particular the last few years. I was chairing the Family and Carers Inclusion Network at Rolls-Royce, and I'm actively engaged in the Infosys Consulting DE&I framework as well. So really looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you all. I mean, if we're talking about forge to flow, if we're talking about productivity, there's a lot that is said about lean, there's a lot that is said about technology, and there's a lot that is said about AI. But none of it works without people. People are central to everything that we're trying to achieve, to everything that is going to move us forward. That was the case historically, and it still remains the case today. There are a rich diversity of people in whatever shape, form you think of diversity. And if we're really going to be the best that we can be, then we need to take account of all those people for the sake of them as individuals, but also for the sake of our organizations and everything else that we're, and should I say, and the wider society, us as a country, us as a world. So if we take that as a backdrop, and we have the question, what can we do to give more people and places the opportunity to contribute and benefit from economic progress? There's a question that comes to mind, and that is, what is it that we're actually really trying to achieve? We talk about industrial strategy, and I know that there's recently come out an inclusive growth report. And so, Louise, can I come to you? Because I know that you have done a fair amount of work about manufacturing strategies. So at the heart of things, sorry, I said Louise, I meant Sally, forgive me. It's that time of the day. So at the heart of things, what is it, when we talk about the strategies, what at heart are we trying to achieve, and who is it that we need to enable us to achieve those things?
Yeah, I think for me there's a couple of things that I wanted to talk about on this question. I think the first is the need for an industrial strategy for the UK. So the last time we had a properly joined up industrial strategy for the UK was 2017. And in recent years we've had plans for growth and levelling up, but nothing really focused around what are we doing across industry. And I think that industrial strategy will address some of the questions about what are we doing as a nation around innovation, some of the digital tools and a strategy around AI, also about what's the skills agenda for the UK, and also the final bit about regional development and how do we have a strategic approach to levelling up across the country and thinking about the development of our own region, but also all the regions across the country. So there's that first piece about having a good enabling industrial strategy for the country. And the second is, if you'll indulge me to stand on my soapbox and talk a little bit about engineering. I asked the IMechE for some really good stats about engineering to support this. So I've got my little cheat sheet. And they gave me some really helpful information. So 32% of our economic output in this country is driven by engineering. So engineers across the country produce huge amounts of economic output. And where we've got high proportions of engineers in a sector, we have above average productivity. So again, engineering is driving productivity. There was a really nice case study they shared with me as well for Yorkshire and Humberside. Yorkshire and Humberside employs 500,000 engineers, and those engineers contribute to £44 billion of value-added activity for the region. So again, another really nice example of where engineering drives productivity. And then the final point they said to me was, actually, as a country, we need 124,000 engineers, new engineers every year. So that's a huge number of new engineers we need through the system. And so I think that addresses or raises a really big question about how do we make the profession as accessible as possible, so as many people as possible have the opportunity to take part in engineering, whether that's at technician level or at senior leadership level. And how do we make the environment of engineering really inclusive? So when you do get into engineering, you feel like your talents can be really well used. And how do you kind of then progress and retain yourself in engineering? How do you want to stay so that we get the best from that talent and really make the best use of all the brains, all the ideas, and all the sort of the thinking of that talent?
Thank you. So I guess with that, there is a need for engineers, a real big need for engineers. And I guess that will go across board, whether we're talking about STEMs or all other areas of industry. We need people, and we need people that are very capable in order for us to achieve the outcomes that we're looking for. And I'm just then thinking, Louise, this time I do mean Louise, you have worked with different companies in different roles. I know we've spoken specifically about engineers, but what other key roles and types of skills are we actually looking for when we talk about moving things forward?
Well, my whole career has been spent in large industries, so in large companies. So obviously when you're in a large industry, we do tend to delineate skills and functions quite a lot. And I recognise when you're in small businesses, obviously the roles aren't as delineated. You're often wearing multiple hats, trying to do multiple jobs. I've been lucky enough to work in lots of different areas such as procurement, quality, transformation, lean roles. And there is plenty of other roles such as business development, strategy, marketing. There's a whole range of types of roles and skills that need technical skills that all contribute to delivering sustainable business. However, I think the thing that really differentiates for me is what we'd probably call the softer skills. And when I've been recruiting or working with teams over the years, it's very much you need people that can see the elephants, can be curious, can ask those questions, can bring teams together, whether that's engineering teams or cross-functional teams, but those that can bring people together to problem solve and collaborate and facilitate those conversations, because that's where you get the value and the productivity is by people coming together to deliver those solutions.
Thank you. And it's interesting because with all three of you, as with myself, we've moved across from one role to another, even though, as you said, Louise, you've worked with large organizations. Like within that, you've moved from one role to the other. And so with what you said, those softer skills also provide the agility to be able to be flexible, to move from one role to another. And then I'm thinking with the things that we say that we need, people talk about skills shortages. And David, and I've heard specifically of shortages as relates to young people. But David, you work in that space with young people. And I'm just wondering, what do we need to do to bring those young people into a workplace and not only support them as individuals, but to support organizations so that we can fully utilize the capabilities that they have to offer?
Yeah, it's a good question. Thank you for it. So capabilities are really, it's an interesting word. And I think we need to stop and we need to just think about, what does capability mean? What does it mean for us, and what does it mean for young people that are coming into industry? Does capability mean academia? Does it mean you have to have a degree? Is that a way to prove that you are suitable and capable to do a job? Perhaps in some situations, perhaps not. But our work at the Engineering Development Trust with young people is to support them to be work ready. And what does work ready mean? What it means is that they have the ability and have gone through experiences that mean that they have renewed confidence and resilience. They understand that failure isn't necessarily a bad thing. You know, we had Mike from AstraZeneca talking about lean and agile approaches to things. You know, you can fail, but fail quickly so that you can do new things. And we try to teach young people these different types of skills as part of the journey that they come on through our programs. That means that hopefully they are work ready by the time they enter industry.
Thank you. And I'm going to ask a following question from that. So the key is they're work ready, so that means they can do the job. They have the capability to do the job. But then how do you make sure, or how do we ensure, and I'm sort of moving into that more in-depth into inclusion, how do we make sure that they're actually able to fit the culture that they're of the organisation that they're working in, that they're able to actually cope within that environment?
No idea. No, I jest. It's an interesting question about fit. And I think the thing that we need to consider is, yes, it's important that whether you're young or you're not so young, that you can fit with the culture of the organisation that you're going into. But certainly for young people, I think that there is a need for us to reevaluate our culture as well within an organisation, and whether we need to change as well. We need to make sure that young people are able to challenge, to ask, you know, the why on earth are you doing that sort of question, and feel that they're not going to be stepped on and things like that. So we've got to give them the opportunity to have a voice and to grow, but obviously they also need to be aware that there are constraints in which that they need to work, and we need to make sure that we educate them and give them the experiences early on, almost before they enter the workforce, that will allow them to understand those sorts of things.
And so I guess that's one of the key things that your organisation does. It helps them to understand that bring yourself, because there's something that people say a lot these days. I don't know whether you've heard it when people talk about bringing your whole self to the workplace. Don't know whether any of you have heard people talking about it, that I want to be able to bring my whole self to the workplace, and don't know whether that resonates at all.
Yeah, it absolutely does, and it's probably worth clarifying. So we do some great work at the Engineering Development Trust, but it's not just us. We partner with organisations to provide young people with those experiences. So we partner with the likes of a British Aerospace, or even I think we might even be doing some work with Rolls-Royce at the moment, so that young people have the ability and the opportunity to go in and spend time in an organisation to learn from real life and real-world examples of challenges that those businesses are facing. So they get an opportunity, albeit for a shorter time frame, but they get to spend time with mentors that are provided by those companies to learn about the real world and what life is like in the workplace.
And so that would then better enable, so I guess we need employers that give them that opportunity, and in that process that will better enable them to understand and find the balance between how much you put forward and how much you step back.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for that. Louise, I'm conscious that you've done a lot of work in transformation, and then you focused in on inclusion. And thinking about that, there's a few questions that come to mind, which I hope are of interest to everyone else as well. Why did you move to inclusion, and what does inclusion actually mean to you?
So inclusion for me is about the opportunity, everyone having the opportunity working or living in a culture that enables them to be their best and not feel excluded. It's important to me. Really, it's become more important to me, I think, since becoming a mum. So I have a 7.5-year-old daughter, and when I think back on my career and my life, a lot has changed over that time. I've seen a lot of change, but there has been far too many times where I've not felt included, and I want to help make a difference so that my daughter grows up in a world where she doesn't have those experiences, where she feels included in whatever she decides to do or whoever she decides to be. So that's why it's important for me.
If I'm not putting you on the spot, I'd love you to give just an illustration of the type of things that, should I say, made you feel, or let me rephrase, that make women coming back to work feel excluded. So I'm depersonalizing it. So because one thing I find is, to us who have been through an experience, it's obvious. But to people who haven't, they don't really understand. So it would be great to just give an example to help bring it to life.
Yeah, and when I've said I had some experiences, I would say probably 99% of the time it's been unintentional. You know, you get the occasional intentional comment or action, but just simple things that you take for granted, like being in a room when you're trying to make a point or trying to talk and people are talking over you, and it's unconscious. It is unconscious the majority of the time. Or you've made a point and someone leans over and just puts a hand on your arm and makes a slightly derogatory comment that then completely disrails the comment you were trying to make. All really simple stuff that seems like every day, or a comment that you've put forward an idea and no one's heard it, but 5 minutes later someone else says it, and it is suddenly the best idea in the room. I've experienced that far too often, and most of the time people don't even realise they're doing it.
So I guess, as you say, the key is things like that are often unconscious. And so there's something about people learning to be more mindful, being more aware of the implications of the things that they do and say, and how that can potentially have an impact on people.
And those experiences that I've experienced as being female and a working mum, there is other experiences that I am not, familiar with, and the last few years in particular, I've kind of gone out of my way to try and understand different perspectives. Someone once used the phrase to me when we're talking about allyship and the importance of allyship. Was I a passive ally or was I an active ally? And I realised I was quite a passive ally to a lot of groups. So, going out of the way and understanding different colleagues, people with different characteristics. I was talking to a colleague who was neurodivergent, had a particular neurodivergence, and they really struggled with volume. And, you could whisper something in the room and they would hear it exactly the same level as if you shouted it at them. So, little distractions like a projector buzzing meant they couldn't focus. But, lots of different things that I just didn't realise, taking other people's perspectives.
Yeah. David, I don't know whether you, from working with young people or in other areas, being a black man, just like I'm a black woman, I'm probably stating the obvious, but elephant in the room, so to speak. Are there any experiences that you've observed that you think, actually, let's mention, it's worth mentioning the type of things that people might come across or do unconsciously without realizing the impact that it might have?
It's a good one. It wasn't in the script, so you need
It wasn't in the
You need to
script.
give me 2 seconds to think about that. I think so. I've been quite fortunate as an individual. Just I guess a very little bit of a back history to where I've come from. I'm of Nigerian heritage. Born in London. Spent the last 3 years of secondary school in Nigeria, and I was brought up to believe that if you were going to be somebody, you had to be a big ticket item. You know, you needed to be a pilot or a doctor or an engineer or something like that. And if you weren't going to be one of those, when you probably weren't going to amount to very much, actually. And that's what I was brought up to believe. And it's just not true. There are a lot of opportunities out there. There is bias, of course there is bias, but there's a lot of opportunities. And what we are about is showing young people the breadth and depth of those opportunities. And as I say, I was brought up to believe, you know, if you were going to study physics, it meant you were going to be a pilot or something like that. And if you weren't going to be a pilot, it wasn't worth it. But there are so many more opportunities within that industry. You know, I was talking to somebody at the Chemical Business Association very recently, and she was saying, we've got a real challenge within that industry because the young people that we need to bring into industry just don't understand the breadth of opportunities there are out there. And she gave me this example. She said, we have tanker drivers, so the guys or girls that drive the massive tankers. She said they can earn upwards of £80,000 a year. But most people wouldn't realise that. I didn't know it, actually, but that's just another opportunity within that industry. So there's a challenge that industry has to help people that are coming through to be aware of the breadth of opportunities that are in there and not just specific roles.
Yeah. So I guess when you say that, what comes to mind is that there's the barrier in terms of how people may respond to us, and that's a global us, whether you're talking on the base of gender, age, ethnicity, sexual orientation, disability, or what have you. So there are the barriers that become because of people's perceptions and the level of awareness that they have. But there's the reverse side of that, whereby people might have false perceptions of what people's beliefs and understanding is and what the opportunities are in places. And I think that's what you've probably highlighted through the fact that actually, if you say engineering, the opportunities are broader than what people might actually think.
Yeah, 100%. But I think there's one thing that's also lost in all of that. Everything you've said is completely valid. But certainly in my experience and working for a number of organisations that support young people to believe that they have the capacity to go beyond expectation is, yes, we know there is bias out there, and yes, we know that there are challenges in society, but let's not use those as an excuse not to become the best that we can be. It doesn't matter who you look like, what you look like, where you come from, how much money you might have in your back pocket. There is still opportunity out there. We should not be hiding behind messages of, well, because you look a certain way, therefore you're never going to achieve much. Let's go out there and fight for what is ours. Let's go out and fight to achieve. Let's fight to be the best that we can be and not hide behind excuses. Society has challenges, but yeah, there are challenges everywhere. Let's kick on as a people.
Okay, and that's great. And it's not ignoring the challenges, but it's still pushing on and not allowing those things to stop us. And I'm just thinking, and I'm looking at Sally as I'm talking, that I think there are a lot of people that believe, yes, inclusion is important. We need to engage different people come, they bring value in different ways of their own right. But then there is the challenge of how do we make sure we don't exclude people that have been in roles traditionally. And as I say that, I'm probably looking at the room, recognizing that a vast majority of the people here are men, white men. And I know that I've heard from men who express the concern of being replaced or being pushed to a side. Now, I know that a lot of your work is with women, women in engineering, but more broadly than that, and the principle could apply more generally. I'm just thinking, how do we go about being more inclusive without excluding people who are already in positions in place?
Yeah, I think it's a really important question to explore. So, as you said, I've done some research about women in engineering and how we get a better gender balance. But I think men being part of that conversation is really important. I mean, inclusion is about everybody feeling included. So to focus in on one or the other is not a helpful perspective. It's not about being divisive. It's about how do we make an environment where it works for everyone. So I think making sure that everybody feels they have agency to drive change and they understand how the change can benefit us all. I think I heard a really good stat at a conference a few weeks ago that said actually with diversity and inclusion initiatives, if a man sponsors it, it's 3 times more effective. So that's quite interesting in actually the power of men getting involved in helping drive some of that change is really important. The other thing I think to say is thinking about intersectionality. So we're not just our gender, we're not just our race, we're not just our sexuality, we're not just all of the different characteristics that makes us. So I'm really keen that we think about how do we make a system and an environment that works for everybody, no matter how you identify who you are. So it's part of the wonder of inclusion and diversity is that it's so vast and nuanced, but it's also what makes it so difficult to do it really well and to drive that change. So I think it's just looking at this in the whole and not trying to pit one characteristic against the other. I think it's about what works for all of us and how do we make a space where people can kind of challenge each other, can talk about their own individual needs and have those needs heard and responded to. And we categorise by different characteristics, and I think that's important to help create tribes and to help create belonging as well. So it's having those things sit side by side as positive actions for change, I think. So, yeah. Opening up those conversations and really helping everybody feel like they've got a role in playing as change agents.
Thank you very much. Louise, you, I consider you as an expert in transformation and change, and I think it's one thing for you to lead the change from the perspective of the work you do, whether it's inclusion or other areas as well. But I think fundamental to what we're trying to achieve, where everyone's value is realised, is that we need leadership. We need people in leadership positions to play the part. I remember Martin mentioned earlier on about having sponsors. And I'm therefore wondering, from your experience, how can we work to ensure, enable and support leaders in different roles within organisations to be on board with the process?
Yeah, it's interesting. You're right, we do need leaders to help sponsor some of these. If I think back to probably when I first started getting into this topic and change management, I was leading a transformation with a relatively new team. Hardly any of them had been in the company for very long. And I probably reflect back on that project as I learned most from my team. It was a very enthusiastic group of HR people, communications, engineers, program management. We had a university psychologist in it. And their focus on how they engaged people just blew me away. The way they just approached when I think back now, it's being curious, going out and having conversations, one-to-ones, focus groups, drop-in sessions, big town halls. Everything they did was about the engagement of people. And even when they were having tough days and, there was people that were being negative or, against what we're trying to do, they went out and actively sought those people out to find out what wasn't working, what could we change, and we constantly adapted our programs to match what did they need to deliver the program. And so I think everyone can be a leader in this space, because I learned most of my team in that particular project. In terms of supporting leaders, though, I think the biggest piece of advice I can give people is sometimes we just need to be not afraid of starting the conversation. No one gets it right all the time, and you will make mistakes. And it's got to be okay to make mistakes. A lot of the conversations are about the intent. You know, if you go out and ask questions, be curious, be supportive, you know, open the conversation so that people want to get involved in the conversation can. If you've got the right intent, you know, people will react to that as much as, you know, if you've used the right words or the right acronyms. So I think there's an element of, as senior leaders, we do need to be more visible. We need to be seen to be trying and opening these conversations and not being worried about what, you know, will we offend someone, you know, if we use the wrong words or don't quite portray ourselves in the right way. I think coaching is a big part of that. Getting a network that you trust as well, that you can go to for support and advice if something isn't working or if something is worrying you. But the big thing is just to take action, and it can be as small as you want to start with. But, you know, taking a bit of an action goes a long way, and you'd be surprised the ripple effects it has.
Thank you. David, one more question for you. We talk about, with young people, a lot of the time, as you said, they have a different way of thinking from generation to generation. We think differently. So they come typically with a different way of thinking, different ideas, often entrepreneurial, outside of the box. And I'm just thinking for leaders, so still focusing on leaders, how does a leader harness that? And at the same time as leaders have been able to harness what young people bring, how do we also teach the young people to self-manage?
Yes, it's an interesting one, and you are now back on script. Thank you for that. So I took the liberty of writing down just a couple of things that sprung to mind earlier on around this. But before I go to my list that I prepared earlier on, there is one thing that I think is really important. So prior to my time working for the Engineering Development Trust, I worked for an organisation called Ultra Education. And Ultra Education were all about using the power of entrepreneurship to instill in young people a belief that they had the capacity to go beyond expectations. And why do I tell you about that? I tell you about that because it was amazing to see the things that young people can do if they're given the space and the time to just go create. Entrepreneurship is an amazing thing. How do we promote it within the business? I touched on this earlier on, is by making sure that the people that come into the organization, that they have a voice. It doesn't matter how small or large you are as an organization, you have to be able to give people, new people coming into the business, particularly young people who think a bit differently, you have to be able to give them a voice to be able to say or ask the difficult questions, or questions that we might not understand necessarily. You know, the why are you doing it that way? There was a lady earlier on, I think her name was Lauren from Orpheus, I think it was, that asked a really thought-provoking question, and it was around, I believe, and I hope I'm not sailing it down the river here, it was around how do we train people or teach people to ask the right question. And it's quite thought-provoking for me because it's not that the question was invalid, it was more, that means that we are still defining what the right question is. And actually, for young people coming into industry, actually maybe we need to be a bit more open about what right actually means, and accepting that they may come in with something totally different, totally out there that we may not be used to, we may not necessarily like the way it sounds, but we should still have the ability to listen to it and take action as needed. I think that's quite important. Now to my list. Excuse
Your
me.
short list.
My very short list. It's a very short list. So there's a couple of things, just in terms of, and I think the question was around how do we make sure that young people are, what was it? Was it welcome? And sorry, just repeat the second part.
How do we support them so they come with their thinking, their way of doing things, and it's how do we manage that so we enable them to do, but actually within context out of the environment that they're in?
Yeah, no, thank you. So first and foremost, I think it's really, really important and often missed is a very decent mentoring system within the organisation. So people, the right people that can support them in their growth within the organisation. I think that's really important. It's really important to set clear expectations about what we're expecting of them as they grow within our organisation. We need to be able to embrace equality, diversity and inclusion within the organisation. We need to foster open communications. Let's be open and clear about what we're looking for, but also that's a two-way thing as well. Just a couple more on here that I wrote down. Encouraging personal development and providing a solid foundation for training, valuable training that these young people can use. And the last one that I've got is let's not stand still. Let's encourage feedback and let's be willing to be agile and to adapt based on what we hear from those people within the organisation.
Thank you. Final question to you, Sally. And it's possibly a tough one. It might not be. But as much as more people than not are open to include people and see the value, there will always be those people that have a different way of thinking and think things are just fine the way they are. How do we navigate with those people, most especially if they're in senior leadership positions?
Yeah, that's like the $1 million question, isn't it? So I guess there's a few things that spring to mind on that. So the first, I think, is particularly in engineering organisations, trying to be data-led. So really, if the belief that a lot of us share that it's just the right thing to do isn't there, maybe just using the data in the business case to actually say, well, there's a real competitive advantage to investing in diversity and inclusion. So there's some really nice resources, actually, that the Royal Academy of Engineers have published, something called the EDI engine, which is a whole set of data and business case to help make the case for inclusion. So there's kind of the cerebral, here's the data, it makes business sense kind of argument and discussion to be had. I think then it's getting into the more people-focused side of things. So actually opening up conversations about what does it mean, where might the benefits be, sharing perspectives, addressing kind of fears and any vulnerabilities that senior leadership has. It's not a zero-sum game. So progress for one group is not less progress for an existing group. So kind of just getting into those conversations about, well, what are your fears? What are you worried about? What might change mean letting go of? And what might change mean grabbing hold of? And really kind of thinking through that. And then I think that the other aspect is really then about how do you open up those conversations between different groups? So bringing in the young people with their fresh perspectives. Maybe how do you set up kind of reciprocal or reverse mentoring relationships? So those new perspectives, those fresh thinking, that new talent can talk to the more established talent and share different views. So you're just kind of getting eyes opened, different ways of thinking and learning. And then also, I suppose the final bit is creating safe spaces for those leaders just to explore their thoughts. So, when you're a coach, everything comes back to coaching, but actually creating coaching spaces for leaders to explore what their take on it is, what their limiting beliefs might be, what new things could they embrace, and really how does that show up in their business and the way that they want to lead.
Thank you very much, and thank you all three of you. As I said, we're only going to be able to scratch the surface with what we're talking about today. So I would love for you to connect with Sally, David, and Louise, and myself. And I'll also say, I think it was touched on by Louise, sometimes we'll get things wrong. And so I'm actually going to apologize to David, might surprise him, because as he mentioned, I had told them what I'm going to cover, and I went off script and asked him a question which might have put him on the spot. And so I'm apologizing for that. And I'm doing so, one, because I do apologize, but more importantly, because it's a demonstration of the fact that in our journey to include, to engage with people, to get the best from people, to bring out the best of ourselves, we will all, from time to time, get things wrong. And the key is to be able to recognize it, to accept it, and hopefully for the people we're talking to accept that too, and then to move on and continue the journey. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you to our expert panel. It was a privilege for me, actually, and for many in the room probably, to listen to the insights, and I've got a number of takeaways, and particularly as someone who was described as pale, male, and stale.
Didn't use those words.
No, it wasn't you, Susan. It's okay. It wasn't you. They knew who they are, and maybe it was more than one person. She's at the back smiling. It's a really important discussion, right? Because productivity is a people business. It relies on people and always has and always will. And if we can get the best from people and they can feel part of something bigger, then amazing things will happen. And I think everything we've heard from the panel and everything we've heard this morning just emphasizes that. So thank you again. It's been my privilege and the privilege of many others. So thank you.